Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Aswang. An aswang is a monster in Filipino mythology that preys on pregnant women. Unlike the grisly attacks usually shown in horror movies, however, these monsters apparently just prey on the life essence of the unborn baby until it dies, and then the mother miscarries. The scary part is that these monsters are also part human, meaning they could literally be anyone during the day. This happened in Metro Manila at around 2011. My cousin told me, "The old man with the new neighbors asked me if you were pregnant." I was shocked. I never even told my family yet. I was 21, I worked nights in a call center, and I never go outside when I'm home, and I was only a few weeks along, so I know that I wasn't showing yet. So, how did this nosy old man know? The said neighbors were new in town, coming from one of the more popular provinces in the Philippines, where witchcraft and aswangs are still the norm. They were friendly enough though, so no one really had anything bad to say about them, other than the nasty rumor that they know about aswang. When I was about 8 months along, I was watching late night TV with my brother at around 2 a.m. Then, something big landed on our tin roof, strong enough to rattle the windows. My brother and I looked at each other with wide eyes as we listened to the footsteps. Yes, footsteps. Stop right on top of me. I was never a prayerful person, but at that moment, I called on gods and saints and angels to protect my baby. But then I remembered my grandmother's story about how she escaped an aswang attack by placing a pillow between her legs to mask the baby's scent, and so I did just that. We had no idea how long we waited. Seconds, minutes, I don't know. But then we heard another jump, and then silence. Until this day, I was glad that my brother was with me to vouch for me. I still couldn't believe that it happened, and it happened to me. Then I remembered the nosy old man. Was it him? It's something weird, mysterious, and unfinished, I suppose. Hi, my name is JM, and I'm a 24-year-old Filipino. I've always loved the call of the wild, the crisp air of the woods, and the feeling of escape from the everyday grind of being a call center agent. So naturally, when a group of my friends suggested a weekend camping trip in the countryside, I was all in. There would be no phones, no noise of the city. It would be just us and a tent, and nature in all its raw beauty. We packed up early Friday morning, cramming our gear into 2 cars before setting off for the mountains. The drive was long, but it was pleasant, full of laughter and the kind of anticipation that only the promise of adventure can bring. This was my first ever camping trip, and I was immensely excited. By late afternoon, we reached our destination. We parked our cars and then started to walk to a secluded spot that one of my friends, Oliver, had visited a few years back. He said that it was perfect, that it was nestled between towering trees with a clear view of the sky, which was very ideal for stargazing. On our way there, we saw an old man carrying some sticks, and he stared at us as we passed by. But when he saw that we were walking into the woods, he called out and asked us where we were going. We explained that we were just going camping. Thinking that he was worried that we would loiter around, we added that we would be on our best behavior. He then said, "Na, bantay-bantay jud mo diha, naarabay tik-tik diha." Which means that we should be careful since there was a tik-tik or an aswang in those woods. We just nodded and then continued on our walk. We have heard so many stories before of those monsters plaguing our area. We're actually known in the Philippines for it. But those are just stories, and of course, it was 2021. Why on earth would we still believe about these things? We got to the location, and then we set up camp quickly, eager to explore before dark. The area was serene, untouched by the chaos of the modern life. And as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the ground, we gathered around a makeshift fire pit, ready to relax. As the night fell, the fire blazed to life, its warmth warding off the chill that crept in the darkness. We all shared stories, mostly recounting old adventures and mishaps that we've done. Someone inevitably brought up ghost stories, and while I usually found them amusing, there was something about the solitude of the forest that gave the tales an edge. We remembered what the old man told us earlier, but Oliver said that again he's been here, and when he was here, he didn't experience anything scary or weird. We just laughed it off and then continued on. Laughter echoed as we teased each other about who would be too scared to sleep. But for all the bravado, there was an unspoken tension in the air, a subtle reminder of our isolation, and the reminder of that old man earlier. The woods were vast and mysterious, and even the crackle of the fire couldn't entirely banish the shadows that seemed to stretch forever. As the night wore on, a hush settled over the group. The sky was a canvas of stars, brighter than anything that we could see back home. The fire had burned low, little more than glowing embers now, and fatigue began to creep into our limbs, so we decided that maybe it was time to turn in for the night. But it was then that I heard it, a rustling in the bushes, faint but unmistakable. My ears perked and I glanced around, but none of the others seemed to have noticed. I brushed it off as a small animal, a common occurrence in the wild. The sound came again, closer this time, almost deliberate. My heart began to race, an instinctive response that was hard to ignore. I scanned the darkness, seeing only the vague shapes of trees against the night. I told myself that it was just the woods playing tricks on me, but I was starting to get nervous. The rustling grew louder, the movements more calculated, not the random scurry of a forest creature. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Something was out there, just beyond the reach of the firelight. One of my friends, Alan, must have caught my anxious glances because he nudged me with a questioning look in his eyes. I gestured towards the trees, my own expression likely mirroring the growing fear that I felt. He listened intently, and I saw the change in his face as he picked up on the sound. We exchanged a brief but silent understanding before alerting the others. A few of them laughed it off, of course. They attributed it to the stories that we had spun earlier. But the seriousness in my voice must have convinced them. We stood, each of us peering into the night, trying to pinpoint the source of the disturbance. I felt exposed, the dim light of the dying fire suddenly inadequate against the vast darkness around us. And then the rustling stopped. It was as if whatever had been moving was now watching, waiting. My mind raced with possibilities. A wild dog? A wild boar? Or maybe other campers? Though we had seen no signs of human presence since arriving. The possibilities were endless and none too comforting. We debated our options, weighing the risk of staying put against the folly of stumbling through the woods at night. The fire seemed our only defense, so we stoked it back to life, tendrils of flame reaching upward, casting flickering shadows that danced and played tricks on our eyes. Minutes passed, dragging on with the agonizing slowness. But then the noise came again, this time accompanied by a soft, low growl that set my nerves on edge. It was not the sound of any animal that I recognized, and a fear gripped me with an intensity that was just too hard to shake. We huddled closer, each of us holding whatever we could to find as makeshift weapons, sticks, rocks, anything to defend ourselves. It felt almost absurd, standing there armed with nature's cast-offs, yet there was little else to do. The growl came again, and with it a glimpse of movement. There was a shadowy figure slipping between the trees. It was quick, almost too quick to be real, leaving us questioning what we had seen. But the dread that settled over us was all too real, a tangible thing that pressed down with suffocating weight. We decided then as a group that waiting for daylight was preferable to wandering blindly into danger. We took turns keeping watch, the hours slowly ticking by. Every rustle, every snap of a twig kept us on edge, and our hearts pounding with anticipation of what might come next. Fortunately, morning came at last, and the first rays of sunlight filtering through the trees, banishing the shadows and dispelling some of our fear. We packed up quickly, eager to leave behind the unease of the night. As we retraced our steps back down the mountain, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, a prickling sensation at the back of my neck. I scanned the forest, but there was nothing to see, just the quiet, unyielding trees standing. And once we reached the bottom, I took one more look into the trees, and there I saw it, a woman with long disheveled hair. She was standing behind a tree peeking at us. I stared at her for a bit, and I'm sure that I saw a smile draw on her face. My friend called for me, and I turned my head away for a bit, and when I looked back, she was gone. We were walking to our cars when we saw the old man from yesterday just chatting up with other people. He probably told them about us. One said, "Kumpleto mo? Walay kulang ninyo?" He was asking if we, as a group, were complete or if anyone went missing. We told him that we were, and then they chuckled and one of them said, "Ha, swerte kay mo, walay gikuha sa inyo ha para kaunon. Ayaw na magbalik diri ha?" He was basically telling us that we were very lucky that none of us were taken and eaten, and also told us to never come back. The ride home was subdued, each one of us lost in our thoughts. The safety of the city was a welcoming relief, yet I couldn't forget the fear that had clutched at me under the stars. We never spoke of that incident again, each content to leave it as a memory and a warning of our encounter with the unknown. But sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment late at night, I remember the shadows and the growl, and I wonder what lurks out there, unseen and unknown. Was it an aswang? I'm not one who believes in the paranormal, and I still don't. But this is one experience I had that to this day, I cannot explain. This happened about a decade ago, and my family and I were visiting Iloilo from abroad and staying at my in-laws' house. They own a large 2,500 square meters lot in Molo. It's a long, deep lot with a massive acacia tree on one end of the property. It's the largest acacia tree that I have ever seen in a residential area, and the canopy of this tree spans the majority of the property. One night, we had come back from a party. It was probably around 1 a.m., and I decided to have a smoke before showering and going to sleep. I'm sitting on the tailgate of a truck that was parked at the opposite end of the property from this tree. But then all of a sudden, I felt very cold, and my upper back and neck had a tingling sensation. Ahead of me at the far end of the property is the base of this massive tree. Mind you, it was dark, but you could clearly see. I saw what looked like the silhouette of a person drop down from the tree. This was probably a 30 to 40 foot drop from the canopy. And the thing is, it didn't just drop, but slowly floated down. And as soon as this happened, my entire body now had this tingling sensation, and I felt like I was frozen. I could not move at all. The guard dogs started going crazy barking. They were facing the tree, but refused to run over to the base of the tree. Once the dog started barking, I was able to move and I walked into the house. And as I got close to the door, I could see the 2 German shepherds run past me and then headed towards the side of the house. It was as if they were running from something. The next day over breakfast, I told everyone at the table what happened to me. My father-in-law, an old-timer who also does not believe in the paranormal, laughed and said that many years ago, there was a helper who quit after a similar experience after only working for the family less than a month. He said that it was evening time and she was found screaming in the front porch area of the house. She said that she saw a creature drop down from the tree and it ran towards her. And she felt what felt like a hand with very long fingers grab her leg. Another helper heard the screams, turned on all the porch lights and then came outside. She said that she saw what looked like a black shadow just run away and disappear. Like I said, I still don't believe in this type of stuff, but what happened to me that evening, I just can't explain. And just typing this makes the hair on my neck stand. It was the kind of quiet that you only find in a small village, where the air is thick with the scent of rice paddies and the sun sets behind a quilt of mountains every evening. Life was simple here, with routines as predictable as the crow of roosters at dawn. And that's how it had always been. Until the day a new family moved into the old overgrown house at the edge of the village. I first noticed them early one Sunday morning. My father had sent me to fetch some eggs from our hens, and as I walked down the narrow path, I saw the family unloading their belongings. A middle-aged woman, a man with a tired face, and a girl around my age, maybe 16. Their car was dusty from the long journey, and I remember thinking that they looked different, like they carried a weight that didn't belong here. In small villages like ours, newcomers weren't just noticed, they were scrutinized. People whispered about them more than they'd talk to them. I was curious, of course, but as a teenager with chores and school to worry about, I didn't think much beyond that initial encounter. At least, not until the animals started disappearing. It began with small things. First, one of our chickens vanished. My father cursed, blaming stray dogs or perhaps another hungry predator. But then, over the next week, more chickens were taken, and not just from us, but from several other neighbors as well. People began locking up their coops tightly at night, but even then, the disappearances continued. My father, always the skeptic, insisted that it was nothing more than a clever thief. But I just couldn't shake the feeling that something else was at play. One evening after dinner, the talk of the table turned, as it had every night for the past week, to the missing animals. My younger brother, always eager to share the latest rumors from school, whispered about the Aswang. For those who don't know, Aswang is a creature of local folklore known to transform into animals and then steal away with unsuspecting prey. My mother hushed him quickly, waving away his stories with a nervous laugh. But my grandmother, sitting quietly in the corner, offered no such dismissal. Her silence was telling, and it planted a seed of dread in my heart. That night, Sleep didn't come easily. I lay in bed listening to the symphony of night creatures outside my window, the familiar chorus suddenly unsettling. I thought about the new family, their quiet demeanor, and how they had appeared here just as the troubles began. It was foolish, I told myself, to think that they would be connected to it. And yet, my mind wouldn't let the thought go. Over the next few days, the village was abuzz with speculation. Some claimed to have seen strange lights flickering in the fields at night. Others spoke of hearing unearthly sounds, and the new family remained a mystery. They didn't venture out much, and when they did, their interactions were brief and polite, but offered a little insight into their lives. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to watch them more, hoping to uncover something that would put my unease to rest. One afternoon, hidden among the tall grasses bordering their property, I observed them. The girl, whose name I learned was Lena, moved with a grace that seemed at odds with her surroundings. She would often stand still, listening intently as if the wind was whispering secrets meant only for her ears. Her parents were more reserved, keeping to themselves as they worked to change the neglected house into a home. Days slipped into weeks and still the disappearances continued. I couldn't shake the feeling that the solution to our troubles lay with the new family. My instincts told me that they held the key, but of course without proof, I was just a boy with a wild imagination. But then one night, everything changed. I was awakened by a frantic barking of our dog and a sound so fierce that it cut through the night like a blade. I rushed outside, my heart pounding, to find him straining against his chain and his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond our yard. I followed his gaze, and there, in the faint glow of the moon, I saw a shadow moving stealthily toward the fields. Compelled by a mix of fear and curiosity, I grabbed a flashlight and I slipped on my shoes, careful to avoid waking my family. With the dog's barking fading behind me, I crept into the night, each step crunching softly on the gravel path. The figure moved with a fluidity that was almost unnatural, slipping between the rows of crops as if it were a part of the landscape itself. My heart thudded in my chest, each beat with a drum urging me forward. I did keep a safe distance. I didn't want to alert whoever or whatever it was to my presence. And as I neared the edge of the field, I realized that the figure was heading toward the house at the edge of the village, the home of the new family. A mix of relief and apprehension washed over me. Perhaps it was simply one of them returning home late. But as the shadow passed under a patch of moonlight, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. It was Lena, or at least it looked like her. But her face was a bit different. It contorted in a way that was both familiar and strange. Her eyes glinted unnaturally in the dark, and I could have sworn that they reflected the beam of my flashlight for a split second before she disappeared into the shadows again. Terrified and unsure of what to do, I just retreated to the safety of my home, my mind racing with questions. Had I seen her true form? Was she an Aswang? Or had my imagination gotten the better of me? The next morning, the village was alive with news of another animal gone missing, and this time, people were truly on the edge. Whispers of the Aswang grew louder, and suspicion turned toward the newcomers. I kept my sighting to myself though. I was uncertain of what I had truly seen, and I'm afraid of steering panic without proof. I began to dig into the family's past, trying to ask questions whenever I could without arousing suspicion. I discovered that they came from a region known for its mystical legends and superstitions, a place where tales of the Aswang were as common as the rain. If you were expecting some kind of dramatic reveal on who was causing so much distress in my village, then unfortunately I would have to disappoint you. Because one day, all of it stopped. And I mean just suddenly stopped. The animals stopped vanishing or getting killed. and no one ever cried and complained about losing a pet. Do you know what else vanished? Well, if you guessed the new family that moved here, then you would get 100 points for that. The family also moved out, probably in the middle of night or something, since no one ever noticed it. We only found out when someone from the village was walking by their house and saw that it was void of life. The mystery of what happened those nights remained unsolved, but life in the village returned to its quiet rhythm. The legends of the Aswang fading once more into folklore. As for me, I carried with me the understanding that there are things in this world that we just cannot explain. This happened in the city. Most Aswang tales come from the province, but I wanted to share that this happens in the city too. When I was about 7 or 8, my sister was just newly born. As I'm the eldest, I was tasked with doing little menial things to help take care of her. One of these things being making her milk. It was during me making her milk at around 10 p.m. that I felt my skin crawl a bit. I looked over to the living room, and then I see it. There, in our dining room, a silhouette darker than the night, lighting a cigarette or something similar, sat on our windowsill. The window is at least 12 feet-ish above the ground, and it scared me so badly that I hurriedly made her milk and I went back inside. There used to be a lot of children in my house and not a lot of men. My cousins and their mothers used to stay with us during summer to help around the house, and my dad worked overseas. So, it was only my grandfather who was around. I vividly remember being ushered into a room once, and all of my cousins and aunts there too, along with my mother and my infant sister. My aunt then started placing palm leaf crosses and ginger and also garlic on the window sills of the room. I know, that whole room smelled. They tied ginger and garlic to the clothes of the children, and they made us all sleep together in that room. The next day, I asked, and this is what happened. Apparently, my aunt heard a faint sound of a tick-tick and flapping wings in the distance, which meant that the Aswang was near us. You see, it's the opposite for this monster. If you hear it near you, it's basically far. But if you hear it and it sounds like it's far from you, it is near you. Do I believe in the paranormal? I don't see the harm in it, so I do have a healthy amount of superstition. Working the night shift as a security guard in a rural warehouse wasn't what I had imagined myself doing at 28. But jobs were not easy to come by, and this one paid my bills. The warehouse was nestled on the outskirts of a small town here in the Philippines. It housed agricultural supplies like seeds, fertilizers, and occasionally farming equipment. Most nights were uneventful, with nothing more than paperwork or a walk around the perimeter to keep me occupied. The isolation of the location was both a blessing and a curse to me. It offered peace from the chaos of urban life, but also a sense of vulnerability. I started my shift as usual, arriving just before twilight. The sun dipped beyond the horizon, leaving a wash of purple and navy in the sky. The air was crisp, typical for the season, and a gentle breeze rustled the field surrounding the warehouse. After organizing my papers and checking the security system, I then settled into the small office with a cup of lukewarm coffee, preparing myself for another slow night. The first few hours passed quietly. I made my rounds, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the shadows as I walked the perimeter. The building was old, its wooden frame groaning occasionally in the wind, but it was sturdy. By midnight, the world was still. I was back at my desk sipping what was left of my coffee when I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible rustling coming from outside. I paused, straining to hear more. Perhaps it was just the wind through the fields, or maybe a stray animal making its way through the night. But still, the sound creeped me out. It didn't sound normal. So I grabbed my flashlight and I headed out. I stepped into the night with a cautious curiosity. The rustling seemed to grow louder though. It was coming from the direction of the tree line that bordered the property. I moved slowly, trying to keep my footsteps quiet on the gravel path. The moon hung low in the sky, providing just enough light to see by. But the dense shadows between the trees were impenetrable. I walked closer, my flashlight flicking back and forth as I scanned the area. The rustling stopped abruptly, plunging the night into silence. I stood still, my senses heightened, listening for any indication of what I might be dealing with. I caught movement out of the corner of my eye and my heart leapt, a rush of adrenaline coursing through me. It was too large for a raccoon or a stray dog, but the glimpse had been too brief to identify it clearly. But just based on what I saw, it looked like the person and not at the same time. I knew that I should call for backup or at least report an unusual occurrence, but something kept me rooted to my spot. Was it curiosity? Foolhardiness? I couldn't say. I was drawn and compelled to know what shared the night with me. Carefully, I maneuvered closer to the tree line, each step calculated and slow. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, a primal warning that I couldn't ignore. I reached the boundary where grass gave way to soft earth, and I peered into the inky blackness. Another rustle. Then, the distinct crack of a twig snapping underfoot. This time it was unmistakable. I was not alone. Perhaps it was someone up to no good. And either way, I needed to confirm and safely resolve the situation. Raising my flashlight, I called out into the darkness, hoping to startle whoever or whatever it was out there. My voice seemed to fall flat, swallowed by the night, and the silence that followed was oppressive. I was about to turn back, and I decided that perhaps I was just imagining things, when a figure stepped forward from the shadow depths. My heart skipped, and the light catching the outline of a person, tall, lean, with features obscured by the shadows. They stood still, not moving closer, as if assessing me in return. I gripped the flashlight tighter, the weight of it suddenly reassuring. My training kicked in, and I took a step back, preparing to retreat if needed. I did also have my knife with me. It was small, but it can help. The figure just remained where it was though, and I felt a chill that wasn't just from the cold. There was something undeniably wrong, something that I couldn't place. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the figure turned and vanished back into the trees, moving with an unsettling grace and speed that left me breathless. I hesitated for a moment before deciding to follow, driven by a need to ensure that whoever or whatever it was wouldn't return to pose a threat. The trees were dense, and I moved carefully, keeping my flashlight low to avoid tripping. The air grew colder, and I was acutely aware of every sound, every movement as I pushed deeper into the forest. I lost track of time, the pursuit becoming a blur of branches and shadows. The figure always remained just out of reach, a fleeting presence that seemed to draw me further from the safety of the warehouse. I was disoriented. I was unsure of my way back, but I still pressed on. Looking back at it now, that was definitely a bad idea. Eventually, reality set in and I stopped, with my heart pounding. I was alone, deep in the woods, and a figure was gone. A sense of unease settled over me, compounded by the realization that I had no clear path back. I turned on the spot, the beam of my flashlight swinging in arcs as I tried to orient myself. The forest, with all its majesty and mystery, now felt like an endless labyrinth. I had to focus, retrace my steps, and keep calm. And while I was lost in thought on how to get back, I suddenly heard something loud moving through the forest. And then I saw a figure emerge. No, it wasn't coming toward me. It flew out from the forest. Yes, you heard me right. It flew. It had massive pointed wings with a humanoid shape where the things were attached to. It wasn't clear, it was dark, and my light was not enough, so I could not make out its features. So that's the best description I can give you. It stayed there for a bit, staring at me, and then it flew away. And as embarrassing as it may sound, I pissed my pants. I knew that I had to get out of there. I began the return journey, marking trees with scratches from a small utility knife as I went, creating a path that I could follow back should I need to. My senses remained on high alert, every distant noise or movement sending a rush of adrenaline through me. It took longer than I'd thought, but eventually I found the edge of the woods and the lights of the warehouse a welcome beacon guiding me home. I stumbled out onto the open ground, relief washing over me as my feet hit the familiar gravel. Back inside, I locked the doors and I called in my report. My boss was understanding, though you could hear that he was skeptical. He was chalking up the night's events to wildlife or just my imagination from being tired. I just nodded along, knowing that I had seen something, though what it was exactly, I couldn't say. For the rest of my shift, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of eyes lurking beyond the range of the floodlights. And when the morning came, I left the warehouse behind, the events of the night replaying my mind. As I drove home, the sun climbing into the sky, I realized that I had no explanation to offer, no clear story to tell. But deep down I knew the truth. Something was out there, something that defied explanation. And while I hoped that it wouldn't return, a part of me remained wary, ever watchful, ready to confront it whenever it might come next. I am writing this to maybe get some help in identifying what I saw, because I have been trying to figure it out for like 3 years now. So, I was a US Marine from 2014 to 2019. I deployed to the Philippines to help out with some joint operations with against the ISIS after the siege of Marawi. Basically, all we did was stare at the top of the jungle canopy, looking for heat signs, and then communicating fire missions for artillery and putting warheads on foreheads. Anyway, we're like 3 months into the deployment and like 4 hours into this mission, just staring at absolutely nothing. We're about 12,500 MSL at that time, over the mountains of Basilan. With really thick jungle canopy, even with the IR, shit is really hard to see. It was like trying to find needles in a haystack with Vaseline in your eyes. But when something's above the canopy, like a helicopter, birds, or monkeys in the trees, it pops, and you can get some really good definition depending on how good the camera operator is in atmospherics. A good trick to know if you have a hotshot camera guy is if they can fine-tune the IR to see leaves in a canopy instead of just a big gray colored blob. I was the camera guy and I was just chilling. I was staring into the void and my pilot burned circles into the sky for hours. I asked my officer in charge of the flight if I could go smoke, while the pilot took over the camera after I locked onto a geo point to keep the camera from going all over the place, and he said yes. So I go smoke, and not like 1 minute later, I hear my boy inside flying go, Hey dude, you should get back in here and look at this." So I go back inside all pissed off because I hadn't got to finish my cigarette. But then I see what my pilot had locked the camera onto. I hop back into my seat and take back control because I'm like, oh shit, hotspot. Is it cows or is it the ISIS? But it's like definitely none of those things. It's flying just above the canopy at a pretty good clip, flapping and gliding on what I can only assume are very large pointed wings. At this point, it's just a very dark shape moving over the canopy until I clean up the IR image and I start picking out more. At first I'm like, dude, it's just a big ass bird. But then I see like a rounded head at the front and a small space in between what I assume was the tail, making me think that it's legs. We're at like 12,500 MSL, so detail wasn't amazing, but you can make out general shapes. Like if I have a good day for atmospherics, light, and altitude, I can tell an RPG from an AK-47 if I'm lucky. But then my smart college-educated officer is like, check the measuring tool, looks kinda big. We have a tool that uses geodata, altitude, and the aircraft's position, allowing you to use the laser and the program to let you know how long a distance is between 2 points. We mostly use it to measure buildings and artillery shot distances, but given that we had the height of the canopy, I didn't see why it wouldn't work. So I take a screen cap of my camera, send it to my pilot to work on, and I'm still on lock. He does the math, and then he comes up with a roughly 6 foot in length. This is from head to toe, and like a 17 in wingspan. As I watched it fly, I kept thinking like, that looks like a bat. Just the way it flapped and moved and the general shape. It was not a bird and I couldn't pick up the feathers, and I didn't see a tail really. Its wings definitely came out like angular and stretched just like a bat. Me and the crew talked about it, passed it up to the hire, but eventually we had to actually go do our jobs instead of becoming amateur zoologists. But after that flight, I just couldn't shake the feeling or place what the hell that thing was. A fun fact, the tree right next to our smoke pit is absolutely filled with fruit bats, and it glows in IR. So me and my pilot got curious, and we started asking the local Philippine contractors who work with the chow hall and the PX. A bunch of them laughed and told us that it's because we stay up too late since we work the night shift. But a couple of the older ones told us about the tik-tik. It's like some kind of big old flying motherfucker that eats babies. And I was like, oh, that seems to check out. In an effort to disprove giant baby-eating man-bats, can someone please tell me what I saw so that my spicy PTSD can just be a regular PTSD? I'm a skeptic, and I never believed in the supernatural. Tales of ghosts and monsters were just stories told to keep kids in line. But one experience changed that for me. Since I was young, I enjoyed hiking with my family. And when I got older, I still did it, but it was just me most of the time. As usual, I decided to take a solo hiking trip in the mountains. It's a place that I have never been to before. I planned everything meticulously, my route, my gear, my schedule. It was the perfect getaway to clear my mind. The first few hours went smoothly, The air was crisp, the scenery breathtaking, and the solitude refreshing. I followed the trails during earlier in the day, and I enjoyed the stillness in the forest, the gentle rustle of leaves, and the distant calls of unseen creatures. But a couple of hours in, things took a turn. I decided to take a less traveled path. It was not very well marked, but this was something that I did often, and I wasn't scared at all, and I went through it. Unfortunately, the trail was rougher than I expected, and soon I realized that I had wandered off of it. The sun was setting, painting the skies in hues of orange and pink, and I felt a pang of unease. I was lost. In the years that I have gone hiking, I had never been lost, and I felt a wave of regret wash over me. I kept thinking, no, I should not have done this. I should have just followed the trail. I tried to backtrack, but the forest seemed to close in on me. As darkness descended, I knew that I needed to find shelter. Panic simmered beneath the surface, but I forced myself to stay calm. Wandering aimlessly in the dark was not an option, and I needed to think clearly. I continued walking when I stumbled through the trees and I saw a small hut in the clearing. Relief flooded over me. It seemed to be abandoned though, but it was a place to spend the night safely, away from the elements and the wild animals. I approached cautiously, knocking on the door to ensure that it was indeed uninhabited. Silence greeted me and I just decided to enter. The interior was sparse, a simple wooden bed, a small table, and a rickety chair. A fireplace stood at one end, cold ashes hinting that it had been used not too long ago. I shrugged off my pack and I sat down, grateful for the shelter. As I settled in, I couldn't shake this odd feeling that I had. The forest outside seemed too quiet, as if it was holding its breath. I tried to rationalize it as simply being alone in an unfamiliar place. So I just went to the bed and lay down, hoping to rest despite my creeping anxiety. I didn't realize how tired I was until I was on the bed, and I fell asleep. Sometime in the night, I awoke to a sound, soft, almost like something moving outside the hut. My heart pounded in my chest. It could be a wild animal, I told myself, perhaps just curious. Or maybe it was the owner of the hut. But deep down, something felt off about it. I lay still, listening intently. The noises continued, soft, shuffling footsteps around the perimeter of the hut. I strained to hear more, trying to convince myself that it was my imagination. But then, a shadow flickered across the window and I knew that I was not alone. But the shadow was weird. It wasn't of an animal. It was human-shaped, but it didn't quite seem like a human. It was massive, it was tall, and it looked like there were bulges over its shoulder. I'm not sure what it was, but if you've ever watched movies that had angels in it, you know that shape that the wings make when they are kept and not spread out? That's exactly what I saw. Every instinct screamed at me to hide, but there was nowhere to go. I slipped silently from the bed, moving to a corner away from the window. My breathing was shallow, and my mouth dry with fear. The footsteps stopped, and I could feel the weight of eyes on the hut. Minutes stretched into eternity, and I hardly dared to breathe. My mind was racing with possibilities. Was it a person? No, it couldn't be. Perhaps an animal that I have never seen before. But I knew deep down that that was not the case. I had no answers. I only had fear coursing through me. And after what felt like hours, the footsteps resumed, moving away from the hut. I didn't sleep again that night, every creak and groan of the hut sending my heart racing, and as dawn broke, the world outside seemed unchanged. as if the night had been a dream. I packed up hurriedly, eager to leave the forest and whatever it was that visited me that night. Stepping outside, I noticed footprints around the hut. They were faint but unmistakable. They were human-like, yet disturbingly odd, as if made by someone walking barefoot. This sight sent a shiver down my spine, and I felt the pressing need to leave. I managed to find my way back to a recognizable trail, and as I hiked, the night's events replayed in my mind, each detail vivid and haunting. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been so close to something that I couldn't understand. Returning home, I tried to rationalize what had happened. Perhaps it was a local checking on the hut or passing by. Yet I couldn't explain the shape that I saw. I then found myself researching old legends and stories, stumbling upon tales of the Aswang, a creature of Filipino lore said to stalk the night. While I had never believed in such things, the resemblance was unsettling. The story spoke of a creature that could take on human form, but had wings and liked to eat humans. It was a being of the shadows. It was too fantastical to accept, but the thought kept nagging at me. I shared my experience with a few friends, careful to keep it grounded in reality. They offered explanations, maybe an animal, a prank, a figment of my imagination. Yet none of their words erased the memory of that night. The sound of the footsteps, the shape of the shadow of that being, the feeling of being watched and being in danger. Whether it was an aswang or a trick of the mind, I cannot say. But I do know is that whatever it was outside of that hut that night, it was dangerous, and I'm glad that I avoided it.
And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. I would also like to give some extra love to my Patreon members, my channel members, and also my tippers. Thank you so much. If you would like to extend a little bit more support for the channel, don't forget to leave a like and a comment down below. If you would like to become a Patreon member, a channel member, a tipper, or even to buy merch, check out the links in the description below. Again, thank you. And I hope you stay scared, because your fear feeds me.